All right, let's get rolling. Conscious of people's time and my own. We've all got plenty to do. And so as I said, I'll let people in. I'll find the chat function a little bit later. Okay, this is a good question. Um, in the chat, if you think about bow tie, where would you rate your, I guess, knowledge, experience? If you could give yourself a self-assessment, and there's no right or wrong. I'm just going to find the chat as well, but just throw a number in there, and that just helps me ensure that um, we're speaking from the right background and context. There's the chat there. Katuli in Zambia. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Um, that's good. All right. Tanya, 5 to 7, unless I talk to someone who is awesome at it. Brian's a newbie, 1. Yeah, all good. And Tarina's a 7. And what about you, Mr. Meister? Where are you? What do you put yourself down as? I'll make that big again. Thank you for that. And it's all good. Doesn't matter what your background is. And hello, Bretner. Good to hear you again, mate. Thank you for joining us in. We just did a self-assessment on where we are with bow ties. There's no right or wrong, and we put something in the chat there. All right, and I'll make that a little bit smaller there. Okay. So we're here to talk about bow ties. If you've been in my webinars before, you've seen some of this preamble. If you can, turn off your notifications, flip your phone over, do whatever you need, because I'm going to go pretty quickly. Quick and quickly, I've said those two things together because I really want to get through some good, juicy content. And so that's just talking about get yourself there. Just to ensure we're all on the same page, so that when we're talking about bow tie analysis, and I can see there that people have different levels of experience, I'll just give you my take on bow tie. So when we're talking about this, we're all on the same page. So we have the hazard here up the top, and then we have our unwanted event or a loss of control event in the middle. Then we have on the left causes, or sometimes they're called threats. So for example, driver unfit to drive could lead to a loss of control of a vehicle. And then we have our consequences over on the right-hand side. And so, for example, we could have damage to vehicle as a result of a loss of control of a vehicle. Then we have our preventative controls, those that are designed to prevent the unwanted event. And then we have our mitigating controls, which are designed to mitigate or prevent or lessen the amount of damage or the level of consequence. And then we have these ideas of pathways, so control pathways that are lined up. So we've got, for example, here, driver unfit to drive, and then we have these 4 controls, or in theory controls, that are designed to, as a suite, prevent that from happening. And one thing which I have seen sometimes people do is the way this designed, it doesn't mean first line in is then first line out. That's the way some people can read it. What this is any or more than one, or maybe all of these causes could lead us to the loss of control event. And then once we're in the timeline of this loss of control event, it could result in one or more or any or all of the consequences. Okay, so throw a question in the chat if there's something there you want to jump into a little bit deeper, which we can look at a little bit further. Just important for us to understand what is bow tie when we're making reference to this tool. All right, so bow ties. Is there a problem? And for those that have probably had a bit more experience, then you could probably answer this a little bit more from experience. And if there's a problem, how do we know it to be true? So yes, I see there's definitely a problem in terms of bow ties, the quality of bow ties, the content, the consistency I see within organizations. I look at some bow ties, I'm like, well, that's not even worth the paper it's written on. You should pretty much just throw that in the bin and start again. And so what the promise is today is I'm going to go through some ideas, at least three key themes or focus areas that certainly if you understood, or if you understood but your organization was able to do, then it will help certainly improve the quality and the quality of the outcome. So I know most, if not all of you on the call, so you see me around, my whole mission is about saving lives at work, focus on single fatality, multi-fatality risks, and there's a collection of clients, current, previous, and actually we've landed a few new contracts just recently in this space of critical risk management. You've seen this before. I'm going to move fast. I'm still working on my language. When I pause, I say and my daughter watches some of the recordings, and I owe her 5 push-ups for each time I do it. I'm working on it, and I'm going to make it interactive as well. So the smaller numbers makes it I like, because then there's more interaction to give you that overview there. And all right, so a bit about the content. I'm going to talk about the strategies, plenty of time for Q&A. And at the end, I'll talk about what you can do to get some more information if you need it. And then I'll talk about how you can get a copy of the slides and recording. Okay, so now next question. So some of you have been involved in bow ties. Maybe Brian, maybe not yet. What are you seeing as some of the pain points? So why aren't we getting it right? What's the hard part? What's the sticking point that you're seeing? So give us 20 seconds, throw something in the chat. Let's see what people are seeing, what they're experiencing, and what do we need to try and mitigate to not have our bow ties end up in a place that is unhelpful. So throw something in the chat. Tanya, getting the event correct and then the cause is correct. Wording rather than control. Yeah, perfect. You've hit about 3 things right there. Thanks, Tanya. Darren, confusion or ambiguity between a hazard and unwanted event. Yeah, nice one, mate. Certainly seen that one wandering around. What else have we seen? For those on the other line, anyone else got any comments? Why bow ties haven't been as effective as we would like? I'll keep an eye on the chat there, see if someone else throws something in. There's some pretty good ones. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. All right, so let's think about the one of the first principles here. And Tanya, you've made reference to this here in your commentary. So one of the ways the bow tie can break even before we get started is around being clear on what the unwanted event is. And we can see there that example there. Even just a minute change across a long period of time can help us wind up off course. And so an analogy I like to give people, because some people don't know about Australia and they get it confused with Austria. So if you're going to travel from LA to Australia, but they got the wording wrong, and instead of putting in Australia, they've got Austria, then with that small wording change, it could have a significant and profound impact. And what I share with people, that same principle applies, in my view, with the bow tie and the center of the knot. If we get that wrong, or not to level of distinction that it could be or should be, we can end up in a place where we've missed a whole bunch of essential information and essential analysis. And that's what we want to avoid. And some signs and symptoms of this is we can see the center of the bow tie as a failure of the control. And I think, Tanya, you talked about that, failure of emergency response as an example, or failure of, a permit. Or sometimes we have an impact, or a consequence is in there, so vehicle collision, as some examples. And then some other ways we can see that is there's just critical controls, or even some controls on the bow tie which have no relevance to the unwanted event. And we're like, well, where did that come from? Because we started to go down different paths that are not related to the risk. And we then, post investigation, some organizations do that retrospective inspection through an investigation lens and go, well, we missed a whole bunch of stuff in our bow tie. Or audits also can identify and understand that. Hello to Oscar, who's just joined us. So where do we want to be? Um, Obviously, your organisation, you want to know exactly what is the unwanted event, be clear, be confident. And there is a relationship with our broad brush risk assessment as well, which we're not going to talk about broad brush risk assessments, but that's our catalogue of our true critical risks. And we've done that prior to getting to this phase of doing a bow tie analysis. Okay, so let's think about this. There's some wording there. Essentially, our center of our bow tie wants, or what good looks like, is it's the point in time that we've lost control of the system or the energy source. And some of you might have seen this image before. I like it because it's a good visual representation for us to help identify where is it. So in this particular model, the blue line there represents going from a safe to unsafe, whatever that means. We won't unpack that. And so, for example, these orange dots represent, well, we've had a near miss, we've had a high potential incident, there was no actual damage, and we're able to recover. So we've gone from safe to unsafe, and then we've come back. Whereas the red line, we go from that safe or recoverable area to unsafe, unrecoverable, and actual damage has happened. And when we are looking to define our bow ties, we are looking to define the point in time or the point in the sequence where we've gone from in control or safe to out of control. Hopefully that makes sense. So that point in time where we lost control of the energy source. So it's we're at a phase now where we've pretty much, the only thing to protect us is the mitigating controls. Okay, so pop quiz back to the people on the line. If we think about that definition, if I took the activity of working at heights, what would be some example wording I could put in the center of the bow tie that describes the point in time at which I've lost control of that activity, or I've lost control of that energy source? Can someone throw something in the chat, or more than one? Because working at heights is an activity. It in and of itself is not an unwanted event. Bretner, well, you've answered the second one, mate. I'll give you bonus marks there. Loss of control of a vehicle, yeah, for the vehicle interactions one. But what about working at heights? What do people think? Because we're not going to have working at heights in the center of a bow tie because that's an activity. So what's the wording we would have in the center of the bow tie in relation to working at heights? Anyone got something? Tenure, not bad. Worker falls from ladder. I'll come back to that one. I want to see what other people have. Bretner, loss of stability at heights. Yep, not bad. What do some other people have? Thank you to Tanya and Bretner as well for throwing something in. Darren, unplanned or uncontrolled movement resulting in fall from heights. Yep. Brian, exposed to fall potential. Some pretty good cracks there. Anyone else want to throw something in there? So all of those are not bad. I wouldn't give them the full 10 out of 10. Oscar, employee falling from heights. Okay. Oscar's was almost there, and I think 10 years also was as well. So if we think about I'm working at heights, what's the point in which I've lost control of the energy source is when someone's falling. So we've now gone past our preventative. We've lost control of that activity. It's falling. That's the point in time in which we've lost control of that energy source. And then the mitigating controls might kick in because there could be, well, they're wearing a lanyard, or they're wearing a harness, and then they hit the fall arrest, and then the harness and all that sort of stuff. So looking at some of those, it's very similar. But if I thought about, for example, 10 years one, I mean, worker falls, potentially we got some wording there. So ladder, well, it could be maybe 20 other variations of falling from height. So if we remove the word ladder is just a context or a scenario of how that could happen, but I wouldn't have the word ladder in the middle. It'd be sort of more fall from height. Darren, yours is potentially unplanned or uncontrolled movement could be a cause that could lead to a fall from height, because we could have other different scenarios as well. So, for example, we could have a collapse of infrastructure or a collapse of something they're standing on. Brian's not bad, exposed to fall potential, but exposed, just because they're exposed, we haven't necessarily lost control. If we think about like a timeline, what's the point in time in which they have lost control and then falling from height? And I think that's everyone's comments there. Feel free to throw another comment in the chat. So that's good. So working heights, talked about that. Vehicle interactions, thank you. So loss of control of vehicle. Oftentimes in relation to vehicles, we see vehicle collision in the middle of a bow tie. I think I've got a next slide, actually has some examples. Here we go. How about this? So here's an example of where it plays out, where if we didn't get the center of the knot right, where we lose some opportunity for analysis and some opportunity for intelligence. So remember we said the ideal is loss of control of vehicle is the center of the knot. But let's say, for example, we ended up going light vehicle collision. Okay, that's what we end up putting in. Then when we go to our consequences, I'm only looking at our consequences through the lens of a light vehicle collision. So yes, it could be injury or fatality. Yes, we might have damage to vehicle. Yes, we might have traffic delay. And it's like my lens is only to there. Whereas if I change the center here to be loss of control of the vehicle, then I can see, well, there could be a whole number of other consequences that could result from a loss of control of vehicle. And these are some things we want to understand, wouldn't it? Okay, well, it could be a pedestrian strike. If I only have the lens of vehicle-to-vehicle collision, then potentially I lose all intelligence and understanding and reference to, well, what about pedestrian strikes? How do striking pedestrians? How do we mitigate that, etc.? So that's what this slide is showing, where an example of if we don't get the center right, how we can then lose analysis information. And then in the slide pack, I'm not going to read this. You can look at this in your own time later on. There is some examples there of some good examples and poor examples to put some more flesh on the bones. For heights for different or falling from a ladder versus an EWP, there's different causes and controls. Absolutely. And you can, I guess it's a good point. And you can, I have within bow ties, there is ways in which you can segment out your causes to contextualize to the equipment. So you can do it on the one bow tie. I have seen organizations do multiple bow ties. For me, that adds just a bit of complexity and more deliverables. My preference is always at trying to put it on the one view where possible. But absolutely, yes, there are differences in causes and controls. Okay, so rounding out this bit, so we did work with a client, and this is recent, but there's a current one that we're just also helping. And they had 30 bow ties. They were old, they're back in the Excel view. I don't know if anyone's seen that with the big triangle shapes and things like that. And they had 30 bow ties. And can anyone guess what we found when we looked at their unwanted event descriptions? Anyone hazard a guess? So let's say they were probably 3 to 4 years old. They said, here's all our bow ties in Excel. There's 30 of them. What do you think we found when we started just looking at the unwanted events? Any guesses? That's an opportunity to throw something in the chat too, by the way. Tanya, not events. Tarina, double ups. Yeah, it was certainly the not events. So those things, there was pretty much 14 of them. They had issues with the center of the knot, where they'd either had a cause in there, they had a consequence in there, or it just wasn't describing the point in time which they lost control. So pretty concerning if you think half of their risk analysis on their critical risks weren't even looking at everything they should. And then the downstream impacts we know where, well, do they have the right critical controls? Do they have the right controls? They're doing all this verification work, but is it even on the right things in and of itself? So pretty scary, but then we're able to recover and move forwards. So, the tactical advice, obviously run your eye over, I'll come back to that, Oscar. Run your eye over current bow ties. Do they pass the test? If not, then there's deficiencies and there's an opportunity for improvement. And as we saw, I wouldn't necessarily say that the bow ties are broken, but potentially there's things that are being missed that are pretty important to the organisation. So rounding this off, so we know we've talked about the impacts if we don't get the center of the bow tie right, that the wording or describing as lost control of the energy or lost control of the process in the middle gets us on the right path, and then the client who had half their bow ties didn't comply to those attributes. So you need to think about now what are you going to do as a result of this? Now that you know that, the opportunities to move forwards and do something about it. Because what we know is defining the unwanted vendor's loss of control is one of the key strategies. It's the first one actually, Oscar, and it's hard to be explained to managers as well. Yes, if you're meaning the rules to put the center of the knot, or I'll say yes. If you're also meaning in terms of how you segment out the bow ties, we can certainly talk about that, but let me know. All right, principle 2. Here, just check there's no one in the waiting room. No. Wrong foot tool for the job. I don't know if you've seen this scenario where we essentially using the bow tie at the wrong time. So the analogy I like to give to help impart this, if you're a professional mountain bike rider, I like road biking and mountain biking, but if you're a professional mountain bike rider and road cyclist, and at your next mountain bike race, you decide to use your race bike. So the one on the left-hand side here, which has skinny tires and no suspension, what do you think the result would be? It certainly wouldn't be as great. Puncture, maybe uncomfortable, and you could use your experience to still get to the goal, still get to the outcome. But it really comes down to your experience to make sure how do I navigate this using the different equipment. And the same thing, in my view, applies with bow tie. If we use it for the wrong occasions, yes, with skills and experience, we could maybe still try and make it work. However, again, it's likely that we're just not getting the value that we would. So we want to get clear on the use case for a bow ties. And signs and symptoms of when this goes off track, well, the organisation just doesn't know when to use it, or there isn't someone that can give that distinction. When I see modifications to bow ties, like, we've added in this field, we've added in this, we've done this, I start to think about, okay, well, maybe we're wandering away from its purpose. Some modifications can work, like I've seen likelihood values added, and maybe that doesn't break. But you've got to be very careful. I've used them to see for process step risk assessments, which I'll talk to, and trying to use across complex systems. And don't get me wrong, I've tried on all these occasions, so I can speak from experience that we want to get clear. So what we want to do is know when to use the bow tie and do it well. So here's an example here. So we've talked about on the left that it's for a loss of control of energy, a loss of control of process, and only one at a time. So you can see there, for example, we might have one for falling from height, or lost control of a vehicle, or what's the other one there? Exposure to live electrical conductors. And each of those topics is one bow tie. Where the middle there, it's not designed for a scenario where let's say a process has multiple hazards. And we can see there, for example, blasting management or confined space management, the isolation process. There can be many hazards involved. And over on the right-hand side, and I can speak this from experience, they're not useful. There are better tools if we're looking at complex systems. And I can't remember from the next slide I've got that. Oh yeah. So that's just the overview. And then the next slide it's an example. So if we took, for example, our broad brush risk assessment for our business said that one of our key risks that could cause a single fatality or maybe multiple fatality, but let's say single fatality is around contact with live electrical conductors or something to that effect. And then we said, well, what are we going to move forwards to do as a business when we're looking at the management of this energy? Then let's start on the middle. We've talked about, okay, well, we'll go and do a bow tie on contact with live electrical conductors, understand all the causes and consequences, preventive controls, mitigating controls, and essentially critical controls from that. So we know that's important to help to manage that energy source. Then on the left-hand side, we might have, well, we do have some work processes where we work in and around this energy source. So for example, our isolation process before I go and work on things that are live or could be live. I want to de-energize those systems. So I might have a 12-step isolation process. And that's a step by step. So step one, do this, step two, do this. And we know that, well, we may or may not know, a workplace risk assessment and control, so a RAC, is a better suited tool for a risk analysis of a multi-step process. JSA, maybe depending on the level, but RAC, if we're talking, in my view, is things with potential single fatality outcome or maybe multiple fatality. Then on the same side of the coin, well, different. If I also, like I'm the engineering manager for the particular business, and a key component is our electrical protection infrastructure and all the things we need to have in place, then I may also want to do some type of risk analysis or effectiveness assessment of that infrastructure. And in those particular cases, we have these more bespoke tools such as a HAZOP or a FEMA or similar. And so what we can see here is we're going to have this one risk and there's multiple tools and each has a particular use case in and around that. So yeah, I do have time. So a quick question, yes or no? Have you seen examples where a bow tie has been used for the wrong use or used? I don't want to say the word incorrectly, but it's been used for a scenario which is probably what it's not suited for. Just quick yes or no. People on the line. Let's just go around the grounds. Yes, Tarina. Retno, yes. Who else? Oscar's yes. Thank you. Tanya, I talked them out of it. They wanted one for a crane failure and I told them to do a FEMA. Hey, good work. That's good. Katui, not sure, mate. This is making sense. Darren, I'm sure you would have seen it. Okay, so again, this can get a little bit confronting if we start to go into our management systems and we say, okay, there's my procedure, or there's my management plan, or there's my SOP. What was the risk tool or risk analysis sits behind it? And then we identify things that, let's say a bow tie that was used in the wrong scenario, then that can be fairly confronting because it could mean that we have lost, again, lots of opportunity to understand the risk and what controls are required. So we're seeing now we need to get the right use case to give us the best chance of really understanding those things, and then that's the decision back to yourselves as well. Now you know this, bow tie, loss of control of energy, that's pretty much it, or loss of control of process. Any other scenarios, then it's a different tool. And then you're working out, well, what am I going to do as part of that? Because we know we want to get it in use it the right way. So that summarizes that one. Okay, the last one. Now this is a little bit, this is very similar to some of the commentary and language I've used in a few different workshops, but one thing here, and I'm sure hopefully you've come across this, is some of the controls, or the things people call controls, are not controls at all. And it's very concerning that we have these things in bow ties. So one, another analogy I like to give is, if you're a coach of a football team or soccer team, we call it in Australia, but Brett, you're in South America, and Katua, you're in Africa, so maybe you call it football. And all the direction given to the team was, okay, you three players, you attack, you three players stay in the middle and attack and defend, and then you three players at the back, you defend. That's as much detail as we give. What would be the result of that? Could these players understand what their specific role was, what good looked like? What's the limits of what they need to do, and where does it start and where that stop? And how would they know if they're doing well or not? And the same idea, in my mind, applies to controls in bow ties. If we're not specific and if they don't pass these tests, then we're not going to know how they should be performing. We're not going to know if they're working well or not. People won't even know what the control is, with clarity. And so here's some examples, and I think I've just said a few of these as well. And we've seen these, which we'll unpack. The idea of orphan controls, which, okay, we come up with this, we think it's a great idea, throw it on the bow tie, but it doesn't live anywhere. It's just words on a bow tie, and that's it. It's not in a management system. It's not in a management plan. It's not part of a position description. It's just some words over here, but it has no translation to actually the work as it's done, if we want to use that term. Or control effectiveness assessments. So, in my view, what good looks like, we want to have the controls that pass a few tests, which we'll talk about, and we have some type of effectiveness assessment performed on these controls at the time. At the time of doing the analysis. This is a rhetorical question. I'm not going to ask this one because I want to come back to this. But I'm sure a lot of you, well, if you've been in mining and safety for, let's say, beyond 2019, then you've probably heard of the Brady report into fatalities. For those of you that haven't been in Queensland mining, doesn't matter. You can see some of the the highlights there, and not a surprise. Thank you, Bretner. Football in South America. I'm glad I got my wording right. Not a surprise that controls either not being robust, not being in place, not being known, or being administrative in nature, all of those sorts of scenarios have been strongly linked to people losing their life. And so obviously we want to do better in this space. So some terminologies, and I'm sure now with act object system. So you see those first three. So a control, if we use this model, falls into one of those three categories, and I'll show a little bit of information shortly on more detail on those three categories. And then also some tests here as well. And the one that I've been guilty of in the past as a safety professional is they certainly weren't specific, measurable, and auditable. And we know, using that football analogy, our controls need to be specific, measurable, and audible, or specific and measurable at the very least. And this one here, this bottom line, which I've added in, is mapped into the management system. So we don't have these orphan controls. I don't have something written on a bow tie said, this is my control. So for example, okay, my control is use 3 points of contact when accessing and egressing mobile equipment. Now, if that was a control, I would also expect to say, well, where is that written? And that's defined in our, falling from work at heights management plan, or is that defined or is it in our mobile equipment training package? Like, where do we actually make sure that is known and understood and applied? Oh, okay. Forgot about this. So self-assessment out of 10 for your organization. Where would you rate yourself? So one is very, very poor. 10 is the best. No more improvements to be made. Just as a first pass, looking at these sort of definitions, how would you rate your organization's controls that they've been defined within Bowties or risk assessments or incident investigations? Oscar's a 4, Brenda's a 7. Okay, Tanya 7 to 8. Trina, don't have any bow ties. Darren 5-ish. Yep. Maybe your previous employer would have been interesting. Brian 5, not great. Yep. That's honest. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so some of you have seen this definition. So an act, a human act, which of itself arrests and mitigates an unwanted event. So the way I like to think about it, if I can view this thing through my phone, like video it or record it, that's most likely an act. And Darren, previous 8.5, thanks, mate. So what do people think about this? So the question is isolation procedure an act type control for the hazard of incorrect isolation? So it's a simple yes, no. What do people think? You can just throw something in the chat. Think about the definition. Oscar's a no, Bretton's a no, okay. Tanya, no, but following the procedure is. That's interesting. We could probably unpack that one a little bit further. Thank you. Anyone else? Brian? You have a view, mate? I'll give you time to type. So I think we're on the same page. So if we think about an act as a human action, an isolation procedure is not a human action. Oh yes, you did. Sorry, Brian. Thank you, mate. I'll give you double ticks. And so what we know is often our procedures or our guidance documentation, if we read within them, they are a collection of acts. Well, that's it, isn't it? It's a how to follow this, do this. So what we would look to see is, okay, for example, this one, the specific act or action that is done, or the control is test the system is de-energized prior to commencing work. This is what would be listed in our bow tie. This is what would be listed in our rack as the control, not the name of a procedure. So when I look at organizations' risk assessments, not including Broadbrush, let's say the next layer down, and I start to see names of procedures or names of safety and health management system documents as a control, then to me that's a little warning sign, klaxons going off in my mind here about quality. So an object is the complete opposite, physical, engineered or designed object, which of itself would arrest or mitigate an unwanted event. So here is, again, another question here. Which of the following are object type controls? So think about the definition. So it doesn't need a human. Obviously, it's got to be installed by someone, but it doesn't need a human to do what it needs to do. Which of these, or any of these, or are none of them, object type controls? Anyone want to have a guess? All of them? Okay, thanks, Tanya. Anyone else? Brian, all? Anyone else have a distinction? Oscar's all? Who else is there? There's 3. Brett, all? Okay. So it is a little bit of a trick question because an object doesn't need a human for it to achieve its function. So think about a seatbelt. So seatbelt's an object. However, someone still needs to put a seatbelt on, don't they, and click it into place. Same as flashing lights at rail crossings. So, if we think about what are they intended to do? Well, they need to warn, hey, flashing lights, but they still need a person to stop and not actually drive across the railway lines when the train or whatever's coming. Whereas the third one, fire sensors and alarm, it's in place, it detects and alarms, and it doesn't need a human to do that. So it's just an interesting distinction. The ones that do require the human, is the system, which is the combination of an act and the object. So, for example, what we just talked about, a seatbelt's an example of a system. The what was the other one? Let's say the warning lights is an example of a system. I won't go deeper in that because I'm conscious of time. It's an interesting distinction, and what I would say is, and we talk about this in our trainings, that think about our traditional hierarchy of controls and these controls that we've classed as engineering controls. How many of those engineering controls actually are systems in that they need a person to do something versus how many of those engineering controls are object controls? And we know if we can take a human out, we're probably going to have a higher chance of success and effectiveness of the control. So, rhetorical question, you can self-reflect. Specific measurement audible, there's some words here. I'm not going to read through this. We get this. We know we need to head in this direction. I don't have time to unpack this one. It'll be in the slide pack. I think I've got another video somewhere where I talk about this. Suffice to say that just because this thing might be a control doesn't necessarily mean I call it a true control. So a support activity, these are those things that we do that maximize the health of a control, but of themselves is not a control or a direct control. So things like training, maintenance, education, potentially even signage, they are support activities as opposed to being direct controls. Over here, we've got verification activities. So they're the things we do that check on controls, but of themselves are not a control. So examples of that can be audits, inspections, reports, external party checks, all of those sorts of things. So we're checking on things, but in and of itself are not a control. It's very interesting, and I'll talk about this in a different webinar when you actually apply this. So there's an organisation we applied this model to and the definition of controls, and 40% of the controls they had on their bow ties didn't pass these tests. We had to throw them out, and it left them feeling a little bit exposed, but that was actually a truer representation of where they were than just throwing lots of stuff on their bow tie. No worries, Darren, catch you, bud. So look, we've talked about that. I'm going to just round it up here. We need to get clear on our controls. There's a framework there, act, object, system, specific, measurable, and audible that can help us there. We need to pull out anything that's support activities and verification activities to help us get clear on what the controls are. We know why controls are important, because people are dying because we don't have the right controls, or they're not in place and effective, or they're missing or not known and understood. Okay. So, quick question back to you. So we've been through a bit and we've gone fairly quick. What is from the content we've gone through? What's a one thing? What's a one thing either as an idea, as an action, as an insight, as a learning? What comes to mind? I'll give you 30 seconds to throw something in, because it's always useful to just reflect and then pull out from your busy brain what is something that was actually of value that you can move forwards with. Let's see what people have to say. Brian, get very clear on when you lost control. Yeah, absolutely, mate. Otherwise, the bow tie is just not going to go. You're going to end up in a place that's less helpful than you'd like. Thanks, mate. Thank you for sharing that. Tanya confirms the issues I know I need to work on until I retire. Oof. Gee, yeah, work to be done. Thanks, Tanya. What else? Who else we got? Bretna, Oscar, Tarina is resizing opportunity, not only for our bow ties, but for our CE. Yeah, absolutely, mate. Keen to could kick that one around a little bit further. There, that's cool. Anyone else have something to share? All right, so I'm going to wrap up now because I am conscious of time. All right, so So we know that there's some challenges with bow tie. Clearly, you're here because you're interested in knowing more or moving forward to doing better. Brian, ensure the controls are in fact controls. Yeah, 100%, mate. So what do we know? If we don't get the center of the knot right, we're going to end up in a place that's unhelpful. Katui, when to use the bow tie? Yeah, 100%. Thanks, mate. We should only use it the right time, like Katui's saying, and not at the wrong times. And we've got to do better, or we can do better with controls. So how do I do it? No, I always talk about this. You can do it the way I've been doing it for the last 25 years, trial and error. You just learn some stuff, apply some stuff. And that does take some time. Or you can do it a different way, where you can actually learn from someone who's done some things from a bunch of stuff, a bunch of times. So what I do, and I do it for the other webinar as well, is pretty much what I offer to people that do take the time to jump on a webinar is just a critical risk triage call. Bow tie is an element of that, of critical risk, but it's not everything related to critical risk. And so this is for people that either they know their organisation, they've got a journey ahead, they're keen to know more, learn for more, understand low-hanging fruit, thinks that there are some improvements that can be made. This is certainly for those people. It's not for people that think, look, we've nailed it, we're probably okay, we're at the top of the mountain. Then this wouldn't be for you or for your organisation. And for me, I'm only one person. The more people I can talk and help with, the better, because I'm passionate about this, saving lives at work. And it's pretty simple. Is what we do is we have a chat, booking a time, we have a chat. Wherever we wander off around the neighbourhood is what we do. And from that, we think about, well, what from that conversation, is there something in our resource library as an example, or is there something we've learned from application with our clients that we can then share with you, that then you can move forwards with a more targeted plan and targeted approach. And so the benefits, obviously, and I wish it was around when I was doing my safety manager thing. There's that time saving, cost saving, immediacy of it, and there's pretty much low effort. Just rock up for a call and we have a chat. So if that's something of yours, I'm only doing it for 2 weeks and then I have to go off and try and have a break a little bit. If that's for you, we'll get you a link, or I'll try and put a link in a little bit later when we're having a bit of a chat on Q&A. So that's what I'd recommend. It's actually been taken up pretty well. And what we are also doing, it's not going to be before the end of this year, but every so often I run a Bowtie Analysis masterclass, so virtually. And this is where we essentially, so that template on the top right, that's a legacy one. We've evolved it now, where we go through step by step how to construct a bow tie. And there's lots of things which I was unable to unpack today. Even, what's the difference between a primary consequence and a secondary consequence, and what are the controls that live in and around there, control effectiveness, all of those aspects. That's what we do. And it's in a half-day course. I know that there's one institution does a 3-day class on bow ties, and I'm not sure how you can get 3 days worth. And I've had people then come and do ours and go, well, I should have just done yours because I got what I needed in a 16th of the time. Anyway, so it's going to be on the 14th of Jan. I'm going to send out a link with that shortly. If you enjoyed this and want to go deeper, then I'd certainly suggest that you come and join us on that as well. I won't need to talk about satisfaction guarantee. Okay, so I've talked a lot and I know I've almost used up all of our time. Now's the time for any questions that people have or comments. And you don't even need to do it on the chat because the lines aren't packed. So if you have a question or a comment, feel free to unmute and sing it out, say it out loud, or if you prefer, you can throw it in the chat. But we can spend a couple of minutes if anyone has a burning question or a comment before we wrap it up. So I'll see if anyone's unmuting or typing.
Hi,
Tanya.
Christian. How you going? So I'm on a bit of a journey with the bow ties. So we've had to do bow ties at a high level because it meets the fatal hazard protocols from the corporate brethrens.
Yep.
But that's where I find with that, like the working at heights, there's so many activities that are done under working at heights, get scaffolding or EWPs, ladders, whatever.
Yep.
So trying to articulate that well enough as an event at that top level is almost too much. So at the moment, I've got,
Yep.
fall from ladder as a cause. And then you've got the event. So it's trying to get that fine line of having a big, bulky, generic-y bow tie versus a bit more specific. So I guess it's how to navigate. And, the other one I've got is like energy isolation. So many things relate to energy, but it's all in one bow tie at the moment. So it's trying to how far to
Yeah.
get down to being too granular versus being too big. And otherwise you're doing formal risk assessment. So it's that bit of a challenge I've got at the moment for looking at that. And then even when, like you're talking about with the procedure, a lot of my controls in there now are, follow the procedure for isolation as an example, and we just articulate in the description because I use the Bowtie XP.
Hmm.
That means test for dead and all that. So I guess it's also a fine line when you've got management systems that are pretty robust to then, you could almost have 10 things on your bow tie control line that's all articulated in
Yeah.
the procedure. So it's a real fine line getting that balance right. And that was pretty much what my management wanted to go to back when I first started this, even though technically it's not correct, but it's like,
Yeah.
getting that balance. So I guess how to navigate that and any suggestions on how
Hmm.
low do you go versus
Yeah. And I'd love to give you a binary black and white answer, which is then easy. But as you know, it's not a but it is a but. There's it's grey. If I think about energy sources, so if we go back to one of my bugbears is when I see a bow tie that says loss of control of energy
mm,
and encapsulated in this, and I've seen them not inside Queensland, where we've got tyres and rims is an example where we've got a whole history of people dying from tyres and rims. So at the loss of control of energy, I don't like, and I encourage organisations to separate those out. So some you could probably bundle together, but tyres and rims I'd pull out. Some have like you know air and water, and some you can kind of put them together. But that's probably a statement around the energy sources. In terms of then the scenarios, it's there's a few ways to skin the cat here. And maybe I'll talk high level, and then I'll come back to this because we can kick this around afterwards. Um, because I got you got some levers in terms of causes, and then also you got some levers in terms of controls too, can't you? So, for example, if I had a generic cause, I don't know, someone lost balance as an example of a fall from height, and then I'm applying this across EWP, ladder, and something else, then potentially, even though it's not neat, in our controls, we could have that segmented out. Okay, in EWPs, this is what we do. In ladders, this is what we do, etc. Or the other way around, then we're segmenting on the causes, and then the controls are specific to the segment there. Um, that's two ways I've played with it. It's not neat. And I think we can keep talking about this after this, mate, because I just want to answer these other questions before the hour's up, and then I'm happy to stay on the line. Oscar, is it certified? Well, yes, you get a certification from us. And yes, we have a full 2-day critical risk course as well. This is just the bow tie one. The full 2-day critical risk one, I'll probably do at the end of January. Well, we do it virtually and we also do it in person as well. And Bretna, excellent. Thanks for that feedback, mate, on that. But Tanya, happy to stay on the line, mate, because I'll finish this up. And if anyone else wants to stay on the line, we can stay on there and keep kicking it around. So you don't need to email because you've got your details. So what we do is we top and tail this, pull together a recording, put the slides together, and it'll be on the landing page. We'll send you the link out, and then also any of the links to that training course that's going to be in January if you're keen to join that. And all of you know where to find me, so we can catch up, chat as you need to, and also the link to book if you just want to have a catch up chat. Let me quickly put that in there now, because if you have the link, give me 1 second. I'll put that in there now. Sometimes it's just easier to do it. Okay. I'm just going to find where the chat went. All right, so I'll put this in the chat. If you want to book a 15-minute, do that there. Thank you, Brian. Yes, absolutely, mate. We'll send you the details. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, everyone. If you need to go, have an awesome rest of your day. And it's almost the weekend, so enjoy your weekend. Brian, make sure you turn on the good weather for Melbourne when I'm there tomorrow. That'd be very helpful, mate. I don't like the going from cold to boiling hot in Melbourne. Okay, so for those who need to go, thank you. If you want to stay on the line and keep chatting, you are more than welcome to. I'll stop sharing my screen and then we can just sort of tic-tac back and forth. So I will do that now. And I stop share. All right. Who have we got? So whoever unmutes first, I guess we can start with yourself. Tanya, I can still see you still here. We've got 2 people trying to join that missed.
Yeah, your emails have just come out saying join soon. So it's literally,
No.
yes, because I had one just as I was joining going, it's on in an hour. So there's some time delays.
Oh no, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, I might need to do it again.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, if you wanna join in and go again, you are more than welcome to.
No,
Okay. All right. I'm gonna
it's all
let
good.
those people in. Thank you though for Tanya, Tarina. We'll catch up, and
Yep.
Oscar as well.
All right. Enjoy the next session.
Yeah, that's it.
No worries. Okay. Thank you. See ya.
Cheers. All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye. Okay. Who have we got that's just joined? Is there Nathan and Jamie? I think. Yeah, Oscar, you can certainly stay, mate, if we go again. Tarina, up to you. So hello to, yeah, no worries, Nathan. And Jamie, welcome. I am going to share my screen. Just give me a second. Wherever I've just lost my controls for Zoom here. Which one? Yeah, Jamie, I think the calendars did get out of sync, mate, but that's all good. We can do an abridged version for those guys. I know there was a bit of a mix-up because we had to move some times around, um, but all good. But we can make this specific to you guys. So who is it? Nathan, you don't have a mic, all right, so you can't unmute. But Nathan, you do. Oh, yep. Jamie, I can see you unmuted. That's awesome, mate. So welcome both of you. And Oscar's going to go again. So I think for this one, we'll probably do an abridged version for you guys. Not that it's not going to be value add, but there's probably some preamble that we don't need to talk about. So maybe well, Jamie, you're already there. Mate, what's your experience in relation to bow ties? If you could, the question I ask people, if you could put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you sort of position yourself?
Recently, I haven't done very much, but in years gone past, I was 8 or 9.
8 or 9, okay, that's good.
Yeah, used to do it for a job, but not so much recently.
Oh, sweet.
Mm.
And Okay, thanks, mate. Thank you for that. And then
Depends on the latest
Nathan.
one. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then Nathan, what about yourself? Probably via chat, mate. Where would you put yourself in your experience base? About a 4. All right, awesome. So for you guys, just started actually making bow ties. Cool. Um, right. So what I'll do is I'll cut out some of the intro stuff, and I think we'll just get right to the meat, if you like, because if you both have some experience with bow ties and for example what the look and feel is, then we don't need to cover some of that base level stuff. So if you're okay with that, I'll just jump straight to the meat and the first idea. So there's sort of three key principles. Some might be very similar, some might be different, or some might be new. And then the first principle here is around being clear on what the unwanted event is for our bow tie. And so when I mean unwanted event, this thing in the middle. Yep, that's what I'm talking about. And I've seen many bow ties that we just didn't get that right, and we've ended up in a position that's unhelpful for our organisation, and we've missed a lot of stuff, and we've left some stuff on the ground. And so if I jump ahead, because again I'm going to cut out a lot of the preamble and setting the scene stuff, is we want to ensure that the center of the bow tie is the point in time in which the system's gone from in control to out of control. We've lost control, and I can use this term, loss of control. And there's a not a bad theoretical framework of visualization that was provided by these authors, and I like it. It's easy to help certainly frontline workers and supervisors and managers get their head around here. So if we think about what this represents is the blue line, we go from, let's call it safe to unsafe but recoverable. So for example, the orange dots here represent a high potential incident or a near miss. So yes, we've had a near miss. We've gone to unsafe, but we're able to recover and then come back into safe and continue on. And whereas the difference is we have some type of incident where we've ended up with actual damage, or in an unrecoverable situation. And in relation to our bow ties, what we want to do in the center of the bow tie is describe the point in time at which we've lost. We've gone from recoverable to unrecoverable, from in control to out of control. That's the wording there. And so, for example, and this is probably a question back to you guys because it's just two of you, and Oscar, you can't answer because you sat in the last one. What do you guys think if we take the activity of work at heights, because that's not the unwanted event, that's just an activity we do, what would be the wording we would have in the center of our bow tie that aligns with this requirement? Can you guys hazard a guess? You can probably throw it in the chat if you want, if you don't want to unmute. Either Fall from Height by Nathan. Yes, that's the point in time. If we think about that, if I'm falling, I've lost control of that energy source now, and I'm relying on my mitigating controls to do what they're doing. Yeah, Jamie, you're on the same pathway. And same with vehicle interactions, because we see this all the time. Whereas, what do you think would be the wording for the hazard or risk of vehicle interactions? What would be the more correct wording? You guys guess? Perfect. You saw that. Yep. Losing control, loss of control. Perfect. You've nailed it. And so on this slide here is just an example of if we had our wording incorrect. So let's say we had, because there's some rules, we don't have causes in here. We don't have consequences. So a collision is a consequence. If we had collision as the center of the knot, then yes, we could still identify maybe some consequences from a collision. But what we miss is these consequences that would be identified and managed and mitigated if we actually had this reworded to loss of control of vehicle. And hopefully you can see that distinction where, just a simple example, we can see where we can miss a whole bunch of stuff. So that's why we really want to get clear on that. So you get the idea. It's a loss of control event. There's some examples in the slide pack around it. And then there's just some wording in the slide pack there around, another case study where someone did it. And then the call to action essentially being, if your organization hasn't done that, or, if you're already, Nathan, been doing this, make sure you start doing it. If your organization's on the pathway and has some bow ties that don't miss that, then we've got some opportunities to improve. So that's the first principle. Again, giving you the express path because it's just two of us, which is cool. Did either of you guys have a comment or a question just with that as an idea?
No, I think that's really handy. It's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Particularly that you showed. It was very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Nathan, can't see anything from you. All right, cool. So the next idea is ensuring that we use, so bow tie has a time and place, and it doesn't have a time and place, and we want to get clear on when to use bow tie and when not to. So I will again skip over the preamble. So we know bow ties are, like we just said, a loss of control event. So essentially a single hazard at a time. And we can see some examples there, falling from height, loss of control of vehicle, fail of strata. So all of those would have one bow tie per each, which is different than if we've got hazards or risks to be assessed that might have multiple hazards or multiple risks within it, such as 12-step isolation process or the risk of working in a confined space. That might different tool. And they're also not designed for complex systems. So maybe an easier way is if we think about electrical energy. So most organizations have electrical energy, and there's a number of different management strategies that are in place for that. And if we go down the middle pathway, then we know, for example, one of our risks might be contact with live electrical conductors. Another one could be arc flash, as an example. And each of those unwanted events would have their own bow tie where we identify causes, consequences, preventing controls, mitigating controls, potentially critical controls after that. Now, also, most organizations have a 12-step isolation process. And there needs to be a risk assessment that sits in behind it. This step, what can happen, what can go wrong, what are the controls we put in place? And for those types of assessments, normally or usually we would use a workplace risk assessment and control, where we can do likelihood and consequences and step by step for that. And then also some organizations also would have electrical infrastructure, and we would want to perform some type of assessment or evaluation on the effectiveness of that infrastructure. And that's where we would have HAZOPs or failure modes, effects analysis and things like that. So the takeaway from here is being, bow ties have a time and place, normally for loss of control event. It's not, you can sort of wedge it into other processes, but it doesn't look good. It doesn't work well. And obviously the risk is you'll miss things if we're trying to use it for different purposes. And similarly, if I'm trying to use a rack to analyze a loss of control event, then also we can end up in a place that's unhelpful. And that's the main idea and main theme for that. Any questions or comments from you guys on that? No, nothing comes through. Okay, cool. No, all good. Thank you, Nathan. Hey, Chris, thanks for just joining us, mate. We had a bit of a mix-up with the booking. So there's been 11 o'clock sitting and then there's a 12 o'clock sitting. So we're currently in the 12 o'clock sitting. And due to lower numbers, mate, I'm doing the express bow tie. So what I can do for you, mate, is I've been through 2 ideas. Just got through the second idea and just finished that. I'll go to the third idea, and then at the end, mate, if we need, we can come back to ideas 1 and 2 for you. When we're sort of just using the chat there. Okay, and that one there, you can see, Chris, just at the end there was just the use case for when we use bow tie and when we don't. Okay, all right. The third idea here is around getting clear on our controls and what is and what isn't a control. And there's a number of frameworks here, and there's a number of opportunities for improvement here. And I see this even today, and I'll probably see it next year and the year after that, about what is and what isn't a control. So some context setting here is I'm not sure, if any of you are associated with Queensland mining. Doesn't matter if you're not. There was a report done into 47 fatalities, and one of the key findings was, and not surprising, the role of controls, where controls are either they're known but not in place, they're absent, they're not effective, they're low down on the hierarchy of controls, missing, broken, etc., etc., etc. So controls is probably the biggest opportunity we have to do better at. And therefore, in the context of Bowtie analysis, we really want to nail the controls at the start, don't we, at the design phase, and not leave it to downstream. So there is some terminologies here where a control can fall into one of 3 categories, which we'll talk to shortly. A human action, an engineered object, or a combination, and also some other tests as well. And one which I've been guilty in the past, they need to be specific, measurable, and auditable. So the way they're described, could I go out and audit that today? Another one for me, which we go hard on, is being mapped into the management system. So the idea of orphan controls, so we might write it on the bow tie, but that's it. So if I say, for example, 3 points of contact when accessing and egressing mobile plant is an action, is a control, then my follow-up question will always be, well, where in the management system is that defined? How is that applied? How will people know that that's the expectation? How will you train people that that's the expectation? So we'd be looking to see that inside the procedure. Maybe it's for the training package for mobile equipment, etc. So we won't do the rating thing there. So I'll quickly run through these. Some of you might have seen these before. So an act is a human action. So something I could see through, record through my phone, is essentially a human action. Now, you've probably seen, no, I won't ask this. So one of the challenges, and I see this time and time again, is people write the name of a procedure inside their risk assessment and say that's the control. And hopefully you understand, no, that doesn't pass the test. That's not granular. That's not where we're heading as an industry and where we need to head. A procedure generally is just a collection of acts or human actions, do this, then do this, then do this. So the true control would be the aspect that's written inside of the procedure. That is what lives on our risk assessment. That is the specific control. Feel free to ask a question or a comment as I'm going through this too, gents, because I'm giving you the express path. So an object, it's the opposite. So it doesn't need a human to do what it needs to do. It in and of itself can perform its function. So quick question, what do you think could be an example of an object control? So it doesn't need a human for it to execute and perform its function. So ignore that a human might install it, and a human might maintain it, and a human might commission it. Jamie, roadway barrier. Yep, it can be fixed. It's a fixed engineering thing. Nathan, smoke alarm detective. Absolutely, it can be fixed in, and it can do its thing. It can detect an alarm regardless of whether a human answers it or acknowledges it or not. Awesome, gents. Thank you. I'm not sure, Chris, if anyone came to mind for you, mate. And then the third type there is a system, which is a combination. So I on the previous slide, I had a trick question. Asked people, is seatbelt an object control? And sometimes people say yes, and then they miss the fact. Well, no, a seatbelt is a system because it needs a person. Well, one, we need like the device, the bit that clicks together, but also we need a human to grab the seatbelt and wear it. So it's a system type control, and that's the third type there. And then some other words about specific, measurable, audible, which makes sense. Don't have time to unpack this one today, and I didn't even in the last group. Is just because it might meet those definitions doesn't mean it's a true control. It could fall into the category of a support activity. So a support activity are the things we do that maximize the health of a control, but in and of itself is not a control. So examples of that are training, maintenance, pre-starts. No, pre-starts might be the other one over. Education campaigns, maybe signs, posters, all of those things. They're support activities. They support us to, hopefully better execute a control. And another category here is a verification activity. So they're the things we do that monitor and check on the health of a control, but in and of itself is not a control. So hazard and housekeeping inspections, supervisor inspections, audits, potentially monitoring, drug and alcohol monitoring. So they're all things that we do to check on the health of a control, but in and of itself is not a control. Nathan was going to say maintenance, always brought up, yeah, absolutely, mate. So just because this thing is maintained doesn't necessarily mean the incident will or will not happen. But we know, well, if we do have this thing maintained, it lessens the chance we're improving the health of the vehicle or the thing that we want to operate in a certain way. So it does start to get interesting. And I said to the last group that if we apply this framework and the previous framework about the definition of a control, for organisations that haven't applied it, it's normally about a 40% reduction in what are actual true controls within their organisation or truly on their bow ties. So both confronting and also, in my view, reflects current state. So that was the other one. There's a few models. So the idea here, there's a few models on what is and what isn't a control. Applying these models gets the organisation to a position to get clarity on the controls and the things that we truly want to have in place and working and managing. So before I move into the sort of the tail end of it, I've covered off the three ideas. It's certainly for yourselves, Jamie and Nathan. Is there a key idea, learning, observation, or something you want to share? Key takeaway? Because again, I'm giving you the express path. Either say it out loud or throw it in the chat because it was a lot really, really quick.
I think that idea of the system can kind of include what we might think of sometimes as an object, but an object that doesn't just do its job itself. So that's a way to think about it.
Yeah, nice one,
Rather than a
mate.
system
And
like a management system kind of system. So.
yes. So and what we find is, because then it's an interesting question. Well, if we then take our traditional hierarchy of controls and our engineering controls, and then say, well, let's go deeper on what our engineering controls are. How many of these are systems as opposed to objects? Because we know any control that has a human component for it to do what it needs to do has a higher chance of failure than a pure object control. And it gives us a different lens to look at some of the stuff we've been doing previously. And then you're right, the other thing about the system. So let's say a fleet management system. Its wording as a system, but they're pretty big and complex. And often I don't put those systems in the bow tie because they're not specific, measurable, and audible. I kind of take what's the thing inside that system that is the control for this particular cause or this particular consequence. But thanks, mate. Nathan, just refreshing my mindset. I've been going through a lot of bow ties recently, and the lines were getting blurred again about what is control, what isn't. Yeah, absolutely, mate. And if you can get a copy of this, well, I'll talk about how you can get a copy of the slide pack. Then there's some of these frameworks also should help. So that's cool. And then all I talked about at the end, because we went around the grounds on that, is what I was also doing for people that join this is, I do 15-minute critical risk triage call where we essentially just, we have a 15-minute chat around whatever's happening, because it could be bow tie related, critical control related, broad brush risk assessment, doesn't matter, anything in this big beast of critical risk management, and then see how could we solve or help move you forwards. I've got a pretty big resource library, or lots of case studies from clients, and that could be then something that could help you guys on your journey wherever you're up to. And then we're just going to send everyone the link to that. So there was that. And the other thing is in January, I'm going to do a Bowtie Analysis masterclass. So half day, and we just go deep and we just pull apart and go through. And there's a lot more depth, obviously, than what I'm going through here. There's some ideas here around the difference between a primary consequence and a secondary consequence. And how do we represent that? How do we understand what that is, and how do we represent that on the bow tie analysis? So that was the extra stuff that I talked about at the end of the session. And the fact that you guys have joined, then you'll be on the list, and then we're going to pretty much take the video recording, get the slides, and send it out, or send the link out to people probably early next week with all these other things.